Hi guys. Sorry about that for anyone that's tuned in. We had slight technical difficulty, but as Toby just said, it's not an online event without any hitches. I'm very used to that, but thank you and welcome for joining Climate Action for Associations event as part of New York Climate Week. I'm Ali Heppenstall, Exec Director at CAFA. Today I'm joined, Toby, are you in New York or are you in the UK?
No, I'm in the UK.
Toby Morgan is Senior Manager of Built Environment at the Climate Group. Toby's got over 13 years experience in energy efficiency and climate change sectors, working across both public sector and NGOs. Toby joined the Climate Group in 2017 and is the LED Program Manager working specifically to accelerate the global adoption of energy efficient lighting in buildings, working very closely with in and around the built environment and smart cities initiatives. Hi, Toby. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me. Really good to be here. And obviously, it's a big week for us at the Climate Group with Climate Week NYC, so really happy to be part of these discussions.
Brilliant. You can tell us all about that in a second. Now I'm going to introduce Chris first, Chris Moriarty. He's a globally respected workplace commentator. He's also an ex-client of mine as well in the Institute of Workplace and Facilities Management, where he worked there for a period of time. He's worked for more than 20 years in professional bodies, including the, as I said, the IWFM, which was previously the BIFM, and also he was head of corporate affairs at the Chartered Institute of Marketing. Thanks, Chris, for joining us. I'm really excited that you're getting to blend your knowledge of professional bodies and FM and the built environment and workplace all in one.
Yeah, like I said, I put online, it's a fairly niche Venn diagram, but I'm glad that we're able to do it now.
Fantastic. So, Toby, do you want to kick off and just basically give us an update on what's going on at Climate Week New York at the moment, and also just recap on perhaps what the broader context of the working environments and the built environment.
Sure, yeah, thanks. So I'm Toby Morgan from Climate Group. We've been running Climate Week NYC for around about 14 years. I think this is the 14th now, so it's a long-running climate institution, I guess, and we run it in conjunction with the UN, so it's timed to coincide with the UN General Assembly. So we've got all the big hitters in town, you know, Boris Johnson's there and all the rest of them. So it's good to have those people involved in those discussions and make sure, as well as, you know, at Climate Group, we make sure we link up both the corporate sector, the private sector, and governments as well, and bring those two worlds together and hopefully spur action with that. So that's what we're trying to do with Climate Week NYC. Obviously, it's been challenging for the last couple of years. Last year was entirely virtual. This year, actually, yesterday, we had the opening ceremony actually in the Time Center in New York, which was great. So Helen, our CEO, was there and hosting a number of, you know, really big names. So we're really happy that we had an actual presence in New York this year. But the rest of it, we're running pretty much as, you know, a hybrid event, so mostly online events, but it's really good to get that headline event out there. And we had the new governor of New York talking about, you know, she said 5 days into her job, the whole of the New York subway system flooded. So that was an interesting start for her, but she was just really bringing it home that, you know, climate change is here. You can't ignore it anymore. You know, it's on our doorstep. We're seeing it every day. So this is now the time for action. There's been enough talk, and we've got COP coming up in Glasgow later this year. So now we've really got to turn all those slogans and those nice gestures into action, and that's what we want to see at Climate Week NYC.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I'll just give you a very brief intro of Climate Group as well. Didn't really mention it right at the top, but we're an international NGO, so we're headquartered in the UK. We also have offices in New York, New Delhi, Beijing, Amsterdam, to target those key markets as well. So we work all across the world with both governments and with business to accelerate climate action.
Fantastic, Toby, thank you. And I've also had the privilege of being at Climate Week in 2019 during a heat wave, and went to it's an amazing event, and how it aligns to the UN General Assembly. It's remarkable, and so much work and effort goes into that from everyone at the climate group.
Yeah.
I guess for me today, it was really important to try and have a discussion about the fact that obviously with a real shifting towards changing workplaces, and all of our events are focused on associations and how associations can take proactive climate action, both internally and to support the industries and professions that their members represent. But more and more we're seeing from CAFA collective members, they're having to really quickly address the shifting and changing nature of the workplace. They've obviously got a lot of had over the last year or so, a lot of empty buildings, a lot of empty spaces, a lot of decisions being made around what to do with buildings. Now entire workforces have shifted to much more of a hybrid working arrangement, etc. But Chris, I wanted to come to you to ask what's the research telling us in terms of the shifting nature of workforce and FM and buildings at the moment, in particular, how you feel this is impacting associations.
So I think we don't need another study to tell us that we're going into hybrid. I think everyone's kind of done that to death. And when the BBC come out with a report that says they asked 50 sort of blue chip mega giant companies, and 43 of them said we're going hybrid, I think that the writing's on the wall on that front. Some of the research that I was involved with at IWFM, and I've done myself just recently, was more looking at what the shift looks like, because no one's, it's all right saying we're going hybrid, but how does that compare to what we were doing before? So just to give people a bit of a sense of what the movement looks like, prior to the pandemic, typically people were doing 60% of people were doing 5 days a week in the office, right? So that's 2/3 of the workforce there. So, and I just want to put a pin in that says we already had too much space, because only 60% of people were using it full time. Now that doesn't allow for the peaks and troughs, because there's sometimes it'll be very busy, and sometimes, typically Friday, it'll be like a ghost town. But that was pre-pandemic. Now what changed post-pandemic, or what looks like it's going to change, is that it's more like 30% of people that are going to work full-time in an office. And there's lots of different reasons, and I kind of want people not to get wrapped up in this kind of generational stuff. Typically it'll be about what working environment they've got at home, or their personal circumstances, but even then, people that got some really difficult circumstances still want to do a bit at home, because what we've generally found is people have reported better than expected experiences. So there was this sort of terror when we were told to work from home, because despite a lot of people I talked to having experienced it before, it was still unique to 75% of the working population in the UK. Now 50% still can't work from home because they do jobs that are in the front line, or just simply cannot be delivered from home. But what happened was everyone worked from home, stigmas were removed, people realized actually I'm quite productive at home, I get quite a lot done. And, like today, I've been out for a run at lunchtime, and I've never done that because my workplace didn't offer shower facilities, which is quite the big players will have it, but not many workplaces will have shower facilities. So suddenly there's all these benefits as well. So we are seeing a big shift. Now, that professional associations will be part of that shift. And what's interesting for me is, having worked for two, they had very different workplaces. So IWFM was a floor on a former council building in a town centre. Now we had a lot of people coming from quite a distance, so actually the opportunities for work from home cut down the commute, which I'd love to talk to Toby about at some point, because a lot of the climate stuff that's focused on workplaces is focused on the physical building itself, and not all the behaviors that lead into it as a consequence of work pattern. But the other one was like the big chartered bodies tend to have, was a big old building, and sort of all pockets of teams dotted all around the place. so there's going to be some unique challenges coming through, both on the climate side, but also on this sort of new ways of working side, where it's going to be very difficult maybe for some teams to work together because the rooms are quite cramped and, you know, people want to be spaced out. So I think professional bodies have got, you know, it's a sweeping generalization, but they've got some fairly unique challenges compared to some of the organizations that are doing a lot of the commentary at the minute about the changing world of work.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. And there are a lot of questions being asked by CEO, finance, and various other, you know, senior representatives of organisations and specifically associations at the moment around what to do with our building, what to do with our workforce. You know, as part of Climate Action for Associations, we offer support to associations around measurement and obviously energy efficiency. But Toby, what are the biggest shifts that you're seeing? Obviously, associations tend to be small to medium-sized organisations with employee numbers of anywhere between, you know, a micro business all the way up to, I think the largest association I know has got about 900 employees in the UK. I think that tends to be like on the much largest side of things. In terms of buildings and energy efficiency, what are the key things that associations should be looking out for and looking to do? And I know it's easy to ask if there are any quick wins, but they'll definitely be looking out for those at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, fully support what Chris said there. We've seen a massive change in, you know, working, and it's here to stay. It's not, we're not all going to go back to the office. As you can see here, I'm in the office, but we've adopted a kind of shared co-working space like many other smallish organizations. So, you know, our old office wasn't fit for purpose. So, you know, we're more agile now, so we can sort of rearrange the way we work, and not everyone is comfortable going back to the office yet as well. So, you know, I think we're going to see a lot more of that going forward. The use of co-working spaces, organizations, associations, you know, sharing space. I think one of the big kind of headline figures that came out of the whole global lockdown was, you know, it would make sense that energy use would go down because we haven't been in our offices, in our workplaces. Actually, energy use from buildings went up last year, and that was due well, a number of factors, but one of them was we increased the amount of ventilation inside buildings to keep the air fresh, to keep, you know, the air safe for people to go into those buildings. What I'm always banging on about is our buildings are not smart enough for these modern ways of working, these new modes of working that we've now got. So you might have, you know, a huge office building and 10% of the people are in. So you've got, you know, one floor occupied, but all the lights are on, all the ventilation's on, all the heating's on, all the air conditioning's on, etc., etc. So what our current buildings aren't fit for purpose in any way that we're seeing that we need to be, you know, in the next few years, because the whole, like we've said, the whole ways of working are going to change. They're here to stay. So a lot more smart tech inside buildings can really help that. That's almost like the icing on the cake. So first you want to do all the basic things, you know, all the simple things first, make sure all the lighting is LED. I think lots of people still don't realize what a massive game changer that is. So even if you've got complex sort of fluorescent lighting, the old tubes that we're all very familiar with from school and old office buildings, even still, if you change those to LEDs, you're going to get 50% savings minimum. So it's like a massive step change. One of the major barriers is obviously lots of companies, lots of organizations aren't owning the building they're actually working in. So, you know, there's lots of tenant, occupier and landlord issues that, you know, that still need to be resolved. There's some really interesting models now coming out that, you know, you might not want to do all the energy efficiency stuff in your building if you don't own it, but there are some new models that are coming out. So for example, energy efficiency as a service. So you're basically paying a consultancy or a energy efficiency organization that come in, identify those savings for you, do this work, and then you pay that company sort of a monthly fixed rate. But hopefully you should still be better off because you're saving lots of money on your energy bills. So there's different ways of doing things. It is a big challenge. Obviously, smaller organizations as well, smaller companies might lack that upfront capital funding that they need to do a big energy efficiency program, but there are kind of interesting ways you can go about that. And then, like I said, we need to make sure our buildings are a lot smarter going forward. So, you can have sensors and monitors inside the building, gather lots of information about how that building is being used and being occupied, but also on that, not just collecting loads of data for the sake of it and then thinking, right, what do we do with it? You want to start the other way around, start with the question, what are we trying to solve in our building, in our organization? Therefore, we need to collect this data, this information. So is it occupancy rates? Is it energy use? How is the building being used? And then you can use that data, if you're smart about it, to improve the operation of the building. And let's not forget as well, if we enable our staff to work more productively, that has far greater gains than just saving some energy. So obviously saving energy is key, and that's what you want to do. And it's great for the environment as well. But if you can use that data, if you can use your building smarter, but also enable your workers to work smarter, that's a whole another level of potential cost savings as well.
Yeah, thanks, Toby. What about the cost implications of that? Obviously, as associations running quite often on a tight budget, not for profits, generally speaking, everything that you've just described sounds super expensive. What's the realities around the level of investment?
Yeah, I think, like I said, LEDs is just a no-brainer. So everyone out here listening should do their LEDs. Yeah. The payback's going to be a couple of years max. So that's a no-brainer for me. The larger scale things, so most of your energy is probably going on heating and electricity and cooling. So that's a whole different kettle of fish. But like I said, if you can use your building smarter to make sure you haven't got the heating on at one side of the office and the air conditioning on the other side, which does happen in offices. I've been in those offices, and we kind of want to sit in the middle where it's kind of not too hot, not too cold. So doing all those basic things, working with, like Chris, is part of the IWFM work. Yeah, working with those facilities managers that should have that knowledge and that information to make sure your building is running efficiently. Yeah, excuse me, I'm about to cough. Sort of packaging up energy efficiency measures. Sorry, got the cooling on in this room, it's quite dry as well. So packaging up those energy efficiency measures to make sure you've gotten a good payback, so you're not doing a massive expensive project that's got a long-term payback. If you can package up a number of different measures in one go, that can often lead to better sort of payback periods and return on investment. So that's a good way of looking at it as well.
Thanks, Toby. I'm not sure what happened then. I think my Wi-Fi cut out, my sound went just for a second. So if you heard me sort of questioning in the background, that was why. Sorry about that. So Chris, from your perspective, what does a sustainable workplace look like for associations?
Well, before I come to that, actually, I just want to add something to what Toby said, because I'm sitting here thinking about my experience with professional associations. You're right in terms of there's this kind of this sort of pyramid kind of in terms of the sizes, right? We know that there's two or three that are enormous and are the sort of organizations that we're looking at other organizations of that size, in private sector and doing, sort of following those trends, but typically our guys aren't. And if I use my two examples, IWFM was 50 people. And we had someone that was effectively an office manager who then their role evolved, particularly because of the institute we were, to become more of a workplace manager. Now, when I say workplace, and what I mean by that is the combination of culture, technology, and the space that we use. So the three aspects of it. But typically what we'll find in professional associations is that things like the way we work and productivity and stuff will be in the realm of the HR department. And then the office team, or if you're, like I was at a sort of a country estate at CIM, the estates team will typically be the ones enacting that move and shifting people around. So one of the actual challenges on top of the cost for what Toby's described is actually a team to own that and to have the skill sets within that team to understand. It's one thing putting all these sensors up, but you're going to get a lot of data, and you've got to do something with it. You've got to turn that data into insight and into action. And I think that will be the thing that will concern a lot of professional associations is, have they got the capacity to make the most of that? So I think my first bit of advice would be start looking into what a workplace team would look like. And it might not be a standalone team that we have to give a label to, but maybe it's a cross-functional team of HR, IT, and the estate/property/office that come together and look at all these things. Now, the pandemic, a lot of the reports I've seen, the pandemic's actually helped those conversations because everyone was in panic mode and just like desperately trying to find people around the business. But I'd encourage people to carry on that. Now, what does a sustainable workplace look like or feel like? Well, some of the stuff that Toby talked about, in terms of it being smart. So that, there's a chronic waste of energy, when entire floors are lit up, ventilated and stuff. The other problem with the ventilation, of course, Toby, is we'll pump all the energy to make it well ventilated, but then it's bloody cold, so we'll heat it up as well. So we've got this kind of double whammy when it comes to trying to make it COVID safe in terms of air quality. But I think the other thing is we already know that we've got too much space. We had too much space beforehand, right? And that's fine. And there's calculations that organizations will take where they'll look at the number of desks they've got. They'll factor in holidays, sickness, and all the rest of it. And they say, right, this sort of space we need. But a lot of the associations I deal with are probably working on a one-to-one desk basis. That's really inefficient. They're probably got fixed desks in terms of you sit there and that's where you do your work, which is not only inefficient, but is incredibly unproductive because you can't do everything at a single station. So not just about being smart in terms of technology, but smart in terms of the flexibility and allowing spaces to have multiple functions to be turned around really quickly. Google are doing all sorts of stuff now where you can essentially build your own section of the office with flexible furniture, and it's all relatively cheap, really. But like I say, you need a team to be driving that. Because I think my kind of final point, and the reason that flexibility is so important and then that amount of space we're occupying is so important, is that there's two studies that kind of fly into my mind. There's one that says, I think it was the US, that said 40% of carbon emissions are coming from the corporate real estate sector. And I'm sure Toby's got similar numbers, right? So we have got a massive, massive chunk of that pie that we could be influencing. But I saw another study that was looking specifically at higher education buildings. And they were looking at what is the most effective sort of best bang for buck way of reducing the carbon footprint. And they've got lots of measures and some of the stuff that Toby could, and his team could help you with and all the rest of it. But the number one was less building. If we just had less buildings, we would be reducing that carbon footprint significantly. And I think for me, the kind of depressing thing is, I remember when the pandemic first started and I was going out for my daily walk before the police came and chased me back into my house. And I'm listening to birds singing and I'm watching videos of, Venice where the fish could be seen again and all this sort of stuff. And everyone was getting very excited. But there's still cranes in London building more buildings. And I'm thinking, just stop. We've probably got enough already. We just need to have a point of reflection, look at what we're using, look at how much of that we need, and then start thinking, like my old association have done, is saying, we don't need that space. Let's get a small business locally in there. And do something really good with them and bring innovation into the place and private sector thinking and all the rest of it. So I think for me, it's not just sustainable from an energy point of view, but it's actually sustainable from a kind of triple bottom line point of view as well.
Chris, you mentioned a really good point earlier around teams. So the Climate Action for Associations, part of the Climate Action Plan, and all the associations that are joining the collective, the first thing they're doing is establishing that cross-organizational working teams, a steering group, and actually appointing various individuals. We're actually not appointing, they're having volunteers come forward to say, actually, I want to be responsible for energy efficiency. I want to be responsible to look at our metrics around travel, etc. And it's actually really encouraging to see that cross-organizational teams come together to start driving this kind of change. So I wanted to reinforce that that's actually really happening in associations. We're seeing it firsthand.
And it's got to, though, right? And this is the thing I think everyone's sort of realizing. It's got to, because there's no point. Let's say, for instance, well, actually, I dealt with a client years ago that introduced a cycling to work program, right? So I can imagine someone somewhere said, this would be great for our carbon footprint. Let's do a cycling to work thing. But like the bike was miles, the office was miles away from the city centre. Like no one in their right mind was going to cycle, because it was like a leg of a triathlon. It was a proper commitment to cycle. And even when you did, there was no showers at the other end. So what these things, and I think probably what the pandemic highlighted, but what, if there's going to be success in these things, we've got to get system thinking in there that says, okay, there's no point having a flexible working program that's going to limit the amount of commuting time that people are going to commit to if we haven't given everyone laptops so they can work from home. Or, do you see what I mean? So there's quite often workplace initiatives fall down because a team that's a crucial sort of peg in that kind of tapestry hasn't been told, or isn't engaged, or isn't part of the conversation. And you suddenly, it's only when you get there and go, why aren't people doing this? Or why are people acting like that? You go, oh yeah, of course, because humans are human at the end of the day, and they'll go for the path of least resistance. And I think that's probably why some of the Toby stuff about smart buildings is so important, because we've been telling people to switch lights off forever, and anyway, like when I have a house full, I'm turning into that dad that just walks around and turns lights off as I go. And I just wish that there were sensors in my house so I didn't have to follow it around, because that would just make it easier, because you can't rely on people is my kind of, very cynical, but practical, pragmatic, perhaps, view of the world.
Yeah.
Did you say you're cynical then, Chris?
A little bit.
I'm just going to build on that a little bit if I can, and just say, we're talking about the team to build up to get these programs off the ground. It's always really important to, with smaller organizations, it's possible as well to get the whole organization interested and give them ownership of it. So not just, here's a diktat from senior managers, you have to do this, you have to do that. So getting the whole organization involved, saying why it's important, why do we need to do this, and sort of putting that spin on it, as opposed to, oh, we're doing this stuff now, which you have to follow some rules about. I think, organizations can really engage their employees on this set of, principles and ideas, and they can, really gain engagement with the workers on that.
Yeah, and I think really importantly for associations as well, to be able to demonstrate to the membership that change is happening at a central level, because most associations are structured as not-for-profit. So if there's any cost savings to be had, or productivity to be increased, or efficiencies to be had, then that's always going to impact and benefit the member ultimately. So we would call it driving member value in that sense, Toby. But what about new buildings versus old? What about the old legacy buildings, like, the great ones that are around, Westminster in London, the RICS and the Institution of Civil Engineers and IMechE and all the grandeur of those buildings versus new build, and what's happening around compliance and standards and legislation, and is there anything that associations really need to be mindful in terms of compliance?
Yeah, there will be. There's always a big debate about this. We think our old buildings are really inefficient, which most of them are. However, making them more efficient is saves carbon compared to building a whole new massive tower block. So the embedded carbon, which is a big sort of buzzword at the moment, has been kind of ignored for quite a while. So we might have this shiny new skyscraper in London that's the most efficient building ever, but then if you use millions of tons of steel and concrete to actually build the thing, then that's around forever. So yeah, preferably energy efficiency, retrofitting old buildings is the way forward. However, it can be really expensive, and it can be actually really difficult to do our really, really old buildings. Unfortunately, lots of them have got planning restrictions and conservation areas and all that, especially with housing. yeah, it's the most cost-effective thing we can do in terms of climate. And like I said, building new buildings is not going to solve all of our problems. I think there's a stat that around about 80% of our buildings that are built today will be still be here with us, you know, in 2050 when we're trying to reach net zero. So it's a massive step change we need to address if we're going to hit our climate targets, basically. But yeah, it's always, like I say, I'm an energy efficiency person. I'm really passionate about this area, and I see the benefit of it. And I kind of bore people to death, you know, talking about it and trying to get people engaged on this agenda. Whereas renewable energy does get most of the headlines as well. You know, people just think, oh, we'll put some solar panels on the roof, that would be fine, or we'll buy an EV. And whereas energy efficiency, it should be the first port of call. And like the old cliche phrase goes, the cheapest form of energy is the energy you don't use. So if you can reduce the amount you use in the first place, it means you have to buy less renewable energy and rely less on offsetting. So energy efficiency is sort of the key part. And like I said, it can be tricky to sort of sell energy efficiency, and people just talk, you know, if people just talk about kilowatt hours and tons of CO2, it can be a bit, you know, not the most exciting subject, and you see people's eyes glaze over a bit and they're staring off into the middle distance. But then if you can try and link those things with your employees, with using your building efficiently, making your organization as efficient as possible, then that's a much more compelling story than just, you know, the fairly basic sort of, here's how this bit of equipment works, we can make this work a bit better. If you can wrap it up into the whole story of, you know, the building occupants are the most important part of building, so we need to talk about them. Yeah. If you don't talk about them, then you're missing a big part of the story. So it's always good to go back and remember the kind of human side of buildings, which can often get left out by some, you know, organizations talking about energy efficiency.
Yeah. What's your sense of internal teams working together? Like, how important is it to have, you know, your IT, your FM teams, your HR, the connecting? I mean, Chris, you've already outlined the fact that, you know, the working group almost to get the action happening, but the real buy-in to make it happen. What's your experience around? Does that the internal business partnering really happen?
Was that to me or to Chris?
Oh, well, it was to you first, Toby, from your experience of obviously working with some major corporates at Climate Group, all the way down to, I guess, Chris, you know, your understanding of genuinely what works in associations.
Yeah, I think it builds on what I just said about, you know, getting that internal buy-in. It can be difficult. So, you know, if you just talk about energy, you're just going to talk to, you know, facilities managers, energy managers, sustainability people. But if you can start linking it to the whole organization, saying, you know, we need to make our organization a lot smarter in the ways we work, we need to improve productivity of staff, then you can start bringing out those stories to, you know, C-suite level people and talk to the finance director or the HR director or, you know, the CEO. So you need to bring out that human aspect of organizations to sell this work. Because like I said, just talking about kilowatt hours and tons of CO2, it's not going to get you too far, even though we're kind of energy people and we're into that. You know, to get to those upper echelons in a business and to sell this, you need that internal buy-in. So you need to bring out these human aspects. Like with any organization, there's a classic stat of per square meter of a building, $300. So $3 per square meter is your energy costs, 30 is your rent for your office space, and then 300 is the staff. So, you know, if you improve your energy efficiency, cut your energy use, you're going to save a bit on the $3 part. If you improve the way your business is operating and you can reduce that office space, like Chris said, because we're all renting out far too bigger offices for our needs, you can save on the 30 aspect. But then if you can, you know, enable your staff to work smarter, improve productivity, reduce absenteeism, which you can all do through this type of work, you can save on that 300 part. So that's the way of selling it. You know, like I said, it all goes back to the people inside buildings, and they're the most important part of any business. So not just talking about the, you know, the four walls of your office space. It's like what you do inside those four walls is is the important thing, and a way to sell it to the kind of CEO level people inside the business.
Yeah, and that's, you just mentioned absenteeism there, Toby. I guess well-being, we didn't really touch on that, Kristen. I know you've got a really strong view around workplace well-being.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing a podcast at the moment about it for the IWFM, and in that, and keeping in the theme of associations, I was talking to David D'Souza at the CIPD, and the CIPD's wellbeing report will show how all these organisations are doing lots of work to try and support the well-being of their employees, but I think it's about 40%, maybe a little bit less, are actually looking at the nature of work itself as the stressor that's creating the need to put these regimes and programs in place. So actually, work is the root cause of a lot of the mental health challenges that we're finding, particularly in the workplace, which kind of makes sense. But stressed workload, inefficient environments, and that's the stuff that's on the surface. But Toby's touched on some of the stuff that's below the surface, which is the actual environmental conditions that we're working in. I saw a study by King's College saying how the oxygen levels and the quality of the air is actually having massive implications on our cognitive performance. Now, no one really wants to talk about air and cognitive performance because it's not front and center of our conversations, but there is a real benefit to creating really productive environments and really getting scientific about it, because you're going to have better people. From a sustainability point of view, they're probably going to have to be in the office less, which is great, because either doing hybrid, that's one way of doing it, but also they don't need to, something that takes them an hour should take them an hour, doesn't take them 2 hours to complete because of distractions or the environmental conditions or whatever it might be, or the inefficiency or the lack of quality of space that they're operating in. So yeah, there's loads to be gained from it, but the societal impacts of that are massive as well, because people I think I don't have the numbers, but you don't need to go too far on Google to find massive billions of pounds worth of lost productivity through sickness and ill health. So I think that's to sort of echo some of the points that Toby made there, is that I think for us to talk about sustainable workplaces and pigeonhole it into energy, the net effect of that will be, again, slightly cynical take on it, but it goes into this sort of work stream that sits over there that, that's our green credentials, that'd be good to put in the annual review when we're in front of members to show that we're doing our bit. But actually it's a whole system of things that are all coming together that say we're benefiting the environment around us, because we're hopefully we'll start seeing workplaces contribute energy back into the system as opposed to take it out completely. So could they contribute to the system and add energy in through renewables or whatever it might be? Can they reduce the amount they're using because they've got much more effective and efficient working practices? Could they reduce the desire and demand for more new buildings because we're using the space that we probably don't need to house organizations that really need a house? No one's done it yet, but there'll be a terrifying stat that would show you on a typical day in London how much space was unoccupied. It would be terrifying, and work out how many micro businesses could be housed in there. Maybe that's one for someone to dig out. But so I just think the system's kind of broke, and what the pandemic's given us the opportunity to do is reflect and go, actually, we can design work back differently. We can therefore build better workplaces around them, and maybe they won't be such a sort of a blot on the landscape when it comes to the planet, because let's face it, we don't need to see any more news stories telling us that we have to do something about it.
Yeah, agree. And I feel like everything that we've just talked, this massive amount of opportunity to benefit business and associations. Toby, just focusing on energy efficiency alone and all the knock-on effects that it can have to people and teams and well-being and costs, etc. There's so many opportunities. for associations. And I think it's, Chris, your point about it being something over there that doesn't necessarily get addressed as the whole systems perspective. And I guess we're encouraging associations to think about it in the round, to join up thinking, systems thinking and teams on this, and obviously take really practical climate action steps like the ones you've suggested, Toby, around LEDs and making the most of energy efficiency, as opposed to looking at switching obviously to different forms of energy in the first place. I realise we're out of time, but we did start a bit late. But I wanted to thank you. I wanted to, perhaps you could just leave a couple of takeaways, bearing in mind it's associations that are tuning in today. Any parting comments? Chris, I'm going to come to you first.
I think I'd go back to kind of where I started, which is think about the workplace in the round, and that's, you know, culturally, technologically, spatially. Think about how all those things contribute to an employee experience. Get the right people in the room, and start thinking and considering how you want what that employee experience looks like, and then work out from there. Get the skills in, get the expertise in, but embrace it.
Thanks, Chris. Toby?
Yeah, thanks, Alison. I would say, like I said at the start, try not to think of energy efficiency as just those kilowatt hours and tons of CO2, because that can be a bit dull. So think about how it affects the whole organisation. Like we've just touched on briefly, the wellbeing aspect is massive, and indoor environmental quality. So if you can improve your building in terms of energy, in terms of smartness, that will improve the whole organisation. So you're not just, you know, you're saving money on your energy bills, which is great, but there's a whole other aspect of it as well. So try and think of all those other things, not just the technical kilowatt hour stuff.
Yeah. And coming back to associations tend to be not-for-profits. That's only going to benefit the bottom line and be able to drive stronger member value. Toby Morgan, thank you. Chris Moriarty, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. Good conversation.
Pleasure.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.